The room smelled like rust and sweat. 5 men were tied to steel chairs in front of me, their heads slumped forward, blood already drying around their mouths. Behind me stood the woman no one dared to name aloud La Dama. She didn't hold a gun. She didn't need to. I had a pistol in my hand. It still carried the heat of the last shot, a metallic whisper of what had just happened. My fingers trembled, not from fear of the violence I had done far worse, but because I understood something that night. I was no longer serving the man everyone feared. I was now a weapon in the hands of someone far more dangerous. She watched me silently, her eyes like twin scalpels dissecting my soul. Then in that calm, surgical voice she said, "You did well. Now you're free." But freedom, I would learn, was just another leash made of guilt, made of silence. You think Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes el Mencho is the king of CJNG? I used to think that too. I thought his name echoed like thunder across Jalisco for a reason. The convoys, the gold-plated rifles, the rows of sicarios shouting, "Puro Jalisco Nueva Generación." It all made sense. He was the boss, the patron, the face on every wanted poster. But faces lie. Power doesn't always wear a face. The first time I heard her voice, it was over a satellite phone in a safe house in Puerto Vallarta. Mencho had been giving orders about a shipment to Mazatlan. Then the phone rang. He picked it up, went silent, and when he came back, everything had changed. "She says we reroute through Tepic. Cover it as agricultural cargo," he muttered. She. That single word froze every man in the room. No one asked who she was. No one dared. Even Mencho's tone had shifted from authority to obedience. That night I began to understand there was someone higher, someone unseen, unheard by most, but obeyed by all. I was just a sicario then, a low-rank soldier guarding warehouses and moving packages. But that night changed me. I started to listen not just to orders but to the silences in between, the pauses when Mencho received calls, the coded whispers of, "She said to wait. She wants Nayarit untouched." It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern. And by the time I saw her in person, I already knew. She was the shadow behind the throne, the mind that made monsters kneel. You want to know the truth. You want to know how a woman you've never seen could make the most feared cartel in Mexico dance to her tune. Then sit down. Because this story doesn't start with a gunshot. It starts with a whisper, her whisper. I wasn't born into power. I was born into dust. My first memories are not of toys or school, but of fields burned by sun and police trucks kicking up dirt on the roads of Michoacán. My father worked odd jobs carrying sacks of fertilizer heavier than his own frame, while my mother cleaned houses in town. We were invisible people living on land that belonged to someone else. Cartels were a rumor back then, men in trucks who passed through at night leaving bodies in the river. The adults whispered. We children learned to listen without asking. When I was 12, my uncle was taken. No one said why. No ransom note, no phone call, just a rumor that he had been caught skimming from a shipment. My father drank himself silent after that. My mother's hair turned gray before she turned 40. At school, the teachers taught us math while men with rifles waited outside the gates. That was my normal. I tried to escape through small rebellions, working at a mechanic's shop, running errands for local shopkeepers. But every path led back to the same shadow. You can't outrun a landscape built on fear. One night I was walking home when a pickup slowed beside me. 2 men in black caps told me to get in. I recognized one. He used to buy gas at the station where I worked. He smiled like he was offering me a favor. "Easy money," he said. "Just watch a house for a few nights." I told myself it was only temporary. I needed cash for my mother's medicine. I told myself I wasn't crossing a line. I was just standing on it. But lines blur quickly. Watching a house turned into moving packages. Moving packages turned into carrying a gun. Carrying a gun turned into using it. Still, even then, I thought I had choices. I thought I could stop whenever I wanted, go back to being invisible. That illusion shattered the day I saw my first execution up close. A man on his knees whispering prayers I couldn't hear over the thump of my own heartbeat. I didn't pull the trigger that time, but I held the flashlight, and that was enough to stain me. I began to change. My eyes stopped flinching at blood. My hands stopped trembling. I learned the rules: don't look too long, don't speak too much, don't ask questions you can't afford the answers to. In that silence, a different kind of hunger took root inside me, a hunger for power, or at least for safety. Because in our world, they were the same thing. Then one evening at a cantina in Tepalcatepec, I heard the name CJNG for the first time spoken like a spell. Mencho's men were recruiting. They promised better pay, better weapons, better protection for families. They didn't say you'd sell your soul at the door. They didn't have to. Everyone already knew. I remember finishing my beer, looking at the cracked photo of my parents in my wallet, and realizing I had nothing left to lose. That was the night I walked out into the street and chose my path not as a free man, but as a man already cornered. I thought I was stepping into a world of men with guns and trucks. I didn't know I was stepping into a labyrinth built by a whisper. Her whisper. The man who brought me in was called El Polvo. Not because he used cocaine, but because he moved through the world like dust, unnoticed everywhere and impossible to catch. I met him in the back room of a butcher shop. He was skin and bones with eyes that had seen too much and still refused to blink. He didn't ask if I wanted in. He told me what time to show up the next day and what to bring: a change of clothes, no phone, no questions. The next morning, I climbed into the back of a black Suburban with 3 other men. None of us spoke. That silence felt heavier than the rifle resting between my knees. We were driven out to a compound deep in the hills outside Tepalcatepec. High walls, no cell signal, the kind of place where no screams would ever echo back. They took our names, fake ones. They shaved our heads. They handed us uniforms with no insignias. We were told we were now ghosts. Our old lives were over. My first job wasn't glamorous. I stood watch outside a warehouse full of fertilizer bags laced with fentanyl. My shift was 12 hours, sometimes 20. No sleep, no phones, just the hum of flies and the knowledge that if anyone tried to break in, I would have to kill or die. But I didn't complain, not even when the heat boiled the inside of my skull, not when I saw rats crawling out of a dead man's mouth after a punishment beating. I kept my head down, did what I was told, and learned how things worked: the codes, the signals, the routes. And slowly I was noticed. One night, Polvo called me into a side room. "There's a package going to Colima," he said. "You'll ride with it. Don't open it. Don't speak unless spoken to." It was my first real mission. They gave me a bulletproof vest and a pistol with the serial number scraped off. I climbed into a Hilux with 2 other men veterans, cold and quiet. The package was in the trunk. I never saw what was inside. I didn't want to. That night, as we rolled past military checkpoints, I realized the depth of this machine, the way guards waved us through, the way one of my partners handed a small envelope to a soldier without a word. Everyone was paid. Everyone was blind. We made the drop. No gunfire, no drama. But the moment we returned, I was changed. That mission made me real. They started calling me El Silencio, the silent one. Not because I was quiet, but because I never asked, never doubted, never hesitated. In this world, that was the highest compliment. But even then, I heard it soft, barely audible, yet persistent. She said to wait. It was always she. The voice behind the curtain. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her face. But already I felt her presence like gravity, a quiet force bending everything in its orbit. They called it La Noche de Humo, the night of smoke. It wasn't listed on any calendar, and no one warned you when it was coming. You just got the order, be at the ranch by sundown, come alone. That was the night I stopped being an errand boy and became something else, something dangerous. The ranch was deep in the hills, shielded by pine forests and guarded by men whose eyes were colder than their rifles. I arrived just as the sky turned a shade of red that felt like a warning. There were others like me, silent tents waiting outside the barn like cattle before slaughter. Inside, the air was thick with sweat tobacco and the unmistakable scent of fear. Men stood in a half circle. Some were veterans marked by scars and gold chains. Others were like me, new untested, waiting to be baptized in blood. Then came El Mencho. He didn't arrive in a convoy. He came on foot alone like a priest entering his temple. He walked among us without saying a word, just looking into our eyes one by one. When he stood before me, I held his gaze. He nodded. That was the first test. Then came the real one. A man was dragged into the center of the barn, beaten, broken, tied to a chair. I didn't recognize him, but they said he was a former sicario who'd tried to switch sides. A traitor. Mencho's voice cut through the room like a blade. Who among you will prove your loyalty? No one moved. I stepped forward. A pistol was handed to me. It was heavier than it should have been. Not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. The traitor looked at me. His eye was swollen shut. His lips moved whispers I couldn't hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. I raised the pistol. I hesitated for less than a second. Then I pulled the trigger. One shot. No theatrics, no rage, just execution. The room stayed silent. That silence was my welcome. That night we were each given our Reglis the rules. Memorized, not written. No names. No questions. Loyalty is blood, not words. Orders come from above, always. If she speaks, you listen, no exceptions. They burned our old clothes in a bonfire outside. One by one, we tossed them in shirts, shoes, wallets, IDs. Every item was a piece of our old selves. When it was my turn, I held my mother's photograph in my hand for a long moment. Then I threw it into the flames. I was no longer her son. I was theirs now. Later that night, as we drank in silence and stared into the fire, someone murmured, "She's watching even now." We didn't ask who. We didn't have to. Because by then, we all knew even initiation was not Mencho's idea. It was hers, the ghost in the smoke. La Dama. My first official assignment came 3 days after La Noche de Humo. No ceremony, no congratulations, just a message delivered through a burner phone left on my cot, Colima. Thursday, 2:00 a.m. Execution protocol. No names, no questions. I met the team outside a warehouse that reeked of fuel and sweat. 4 of us climbed into a pickup, blacked out plates, blacked out windows. In the back was a man duct-taped at the wrists and ankles, face covered by a blood-soaked sack. They said he was a debt collector who skimmed from the plaza and leaked names to a rival cell in Guadalajara. I didn't care. My job wasn't to judge. My job was to carry out justice, cartel style. We drove out to an abandoned field surrounded by sugarcane. The stars above were too quiet. The wind didn't move. Everything felt frozen in anticipation. They handed me a machete. No one spoke. No music. No ritual. Just a nod. I hesitated not out of mercy, but out of fear. Not fear of killing. Fear of doing it wrong. Then the man under the sack began to cry. He begged in whispers, "Por favor, tengo hijos." His voice cracked something inside me. A noise I hadn't heard in months. My humanity. I crushed it. One swing, then another. The blade was dull. The job was messy. Afterward, I vomited behind the truck while the others lit a cigarette. But I didn't complain. That was the point. Pain was the toll to enter this world, and I paid it in full. That night marked me. They gave me new duties guarding safe houses, transporting shipments, collecting rent from local businesses. The blood didn't stop, but it got easier. My hands stopped shaking. My eyes stopped blinking. I started to enjoy the silence that came after obedience. That's when I began hearing about her more often. Not directly, never directly, but always in the margins. A call intercepted, a shipment rerouted, a politician paid, and always the same explanation. She said, she doesn't want that route. She said no blood in Nayarit this week. She wants that judge left untouched for now. And the most terrifying part wasn't what she ordered. It was how Mencho responded. He didn't bark, he didn't argue, he listened, like a student, like a servant. One night, I was posted outside a meeting in Zapopan. I saw Mencho pacing before entering the house, adjusting his shirt, smoothing his hair, breathing deeply, like a man going to confession, not command. When he came out an hour later, his eyes were empty. He gave new orders. No explanation. Just change. Everything, routes, contacts, targets shifted. Because she had spoken. That's when the fear changed. I no longer feared death. I feared irrelevance. Because in our world, a man with a gun could still be replaced. But the one who whispered to El Mencho, she was irreplaceable, untouchable, and somehow everywhere. Promotion in the cartel didn't come with applause. It came in silence when you were asked to do more without being told why. I began coordinating convoys. Not just riding in the back seat, but deciding who rode where, which routes were safe, which safe houses were clean. I held 2 phones at all times, one for operations, one for emergencies. But really both were for obedience. They started calling me El Silencio more often now. It wasn't a nickname anymore, it was a rank. I was sent to train new recruits at a ranch near Tamazula. I taught them how to clean weapons, how to pack trucks, how to kill without wasting bullets. I watched kids who were barely old enough to shave laugh while slicing open a traitor's stomach. That was the sickness of our world. Cruelty became a rite of passage. One afternoon while reviewing security reports, I was summoned by a commander. "There's a house in Zapopan. Go with the patron," he meant Mencho. We arrived just after sunset. The house looked normal, white walls, iron gate, a modest garden. But inside it was another world. Hardwood floors, vintage paintings, a quietness that wasn't emptiness, it was precision. It felt curated. Mencho adjusted his shirt in the mirror just like before. I stood behind him silent. Then she entered. Not through a door, through presence. La Dama. She was already seated at the table when we entered, flanked by files, manila envelopes, handwritten notes. She didn't rise. She didn't need to. Mencho sat 2 seats away. I stood behind them like furniture. She spoke softly, flipping through pages with fingers that looked delicate but moved with lethal clarity. She listed names, judges, mayors, army commanders as if reciting ingredients. She circled one with a gold pen. "This one's useful. His brother owes us." She pointed to another. "This one will disappear." Quietly. Then she looked up. Her eyes fell on me. "You're El Silencio," she said. Not a question. A statement. "You trained 12 this month. 2 are unstable. Replace them." Her voice was low without urgency, but it felt like a blade against my neck. Then she did something that turned blood cold. She mentioned the name of a commander's mistress in Querétaro, another man's son in California, my mother's clinic bills. Every man in that room froze not from shame, but from fear. She knew everything. Not just logistics, not just routes. She knew us, and she used that knowledge with surgical precision. After the meeting, no one said a word, not even Mencho. He simply nodded like a dog released from leash. I understood that day that La Dama didn't just command. She curated reality. She didn't scream. She didn't threaten. She revealed. And once she knew, you really knew you, your soul no longer belonged to you. It belonged to her. They say cartels are chaos, guns, drugs, blood, betrayal. But inside the CJNG, it wasn't chaos. It was order. Brutal, meticulous, sacred. Every morning began the same encrypted messages delivered at 500 a.m., often laced with subtle corrections phrases like, "Use alternate entry point" or "Delay transfer 48 hours." They didn't come from Mencho. They came from the voice behind the curtain. La Dama. Her presence was constant even in absence. We had protocols for everything: how to handle cargo, how to dispose of bodies, how to react if someone asked the wrong question. The unwritten rule was this: ask only once. If you needed to ask again, you wouldn't be alive long enough to. And then there were the punishments. I witnessed a man beaten with rebar until his spine cracked. His crime was using the wrong burner phone to text his girlfriend. Another was buried alive outside Uruapan for losing track of a shipment worth $7,000, not $7 million. $7,000. Because the amount wasn't the problem. The principle was. Once I watched a new recruit refuse to get into a truck with a dead body in the back. He said it wasn't his job. 3 hours later, his tongue was nailed to a tree near his family's village. That was how the organization taught obedience. But it wasn't all blood and silence. There were parties, extravagant, secret, obscene. In hidden ranches guarded by ex-military, we drank aged whiskey and partied with models imported from Colombia and Argentina. Politicians joined us, sometimes pretending not to recognize Mencho. Judges danced with women too young to vote. A congressman once toasted to the invisible hands that keep Mexico turning. Everyone laughed. But those of us who knew, really knew, felt the chill. Because the most invisible hand in that room wasn't holding a drink. It was writing the guest list, her list. Even in celebration, she governed. We never saw her at these events. She didn't need to be there. Every action had her echo, the menu, the music, even who left early and who was told to stay late. And when someone crossed the line, no one blamed Mencho. They whispered, La Dama didn't like that. Trust was currency in our world, but so was paranoia. We spied on each other. We kept files on each other. I knew the blood-type bank passwords and mistresses of 5 men I considered brothers, because if they ever flipped, I had to be ready. And they had the same on me. Some nights I didn't sleep, not because of guilt, but because I was waiting to hear if I would be called. There was no comfort, no peace, only function. We were tools, sharp, loyal, replaceable. And she, the woman we never touched, never questioned, she held the toolbox. For years, I believed we were the ones pulling the strings, that CJNG controlled governors, silenced mayors, bought judges like groceries. I thought we were at the top of the pyramid. But then came Kalima. We were preparing a coordinated strike against a rival cell, 20 men, heavy firepower, satellite comms, exit routes timed to the second. I led the ground unit. Everyone was ready. Until the call came. 3 words. She said, wait. The operation was suspended. No explanation. 4 days later, we watched the news in silence as Mexican Marines stormed the rival's compound. Half were killed, the rest arrested. No shots fired from our side. We didn't lose a man. We didn't waste a bullet. That was when I realized she wasn't just managing us. She was managing them, too. The military, the press, the timing. It was all choreography. She let the government clean our mess, not because she feared war, but because war was inefficient. That month, I started seeing signs everywhere. A federal police chief suddenly committed suicide after refusing a bribe. A local newspaper retracted an investigative story after a quiet visit from a lawyer we'd never seen before. Rumors began to circulate about a network, not of criminals, of collaborators, bankers laundering funds through international shell corporations, senators voting down bills that would harm our logistics, even NGOs receiving donations to silence border violence reports. And at the center of it all, still unseen, still untouched, was La Dama. She didn't just command cartel territory. She navigated political fault lines. She spoke the language of power in all its dialects: law, fear, money, shame. Once I was posted outside a private meeting in Veracruz. A wealthy businessman had stopped paying his quota. Mencho wanted him dead. But she intervened. Instead of a bullet, the man received a package photographs of his 17-year-old daughter at a private party, images no one else could have accessed. He paid within the hour, and then doubled his monthly rate. That was her true genius. She weaponized psychology, not pistols. She didn't need to shoot you. She made you pull the trigger on yourself. In another instance, she summoned a federal deputy who had stalled a law that favored our operations. No threats were issued. She simply listed his secret properties, his offshore accounts, the affair he thought no one knew about. By the end of the conversation, he was sweating like a pig. A week later, the law passed without a whisper. That night, it finally hit me. Mencho wasn't the king. He was the sword. But she was the hand. The hand that decided where to strike, when to strike, who to cut, and who to leave untouched. And the cruelest part, she never took credit. She stayed invisible, because power that hides is the hardest to kill. Collapse doesn't come with explosions. It starts with whispers. It began when I stopped sleeping. Every creak in the hallway, every knock at the door felt like the beginning of my end. I'd seen men vanish overnight, trusted lieutenants, veteran sicarios, even Mencho's former driver. No warnings, no explanations. One day they were drinking with you. The next their bodies were hanging from bridges. I had begun planning my escape months earlier, slowly, quietly. Cash stashed in 3 different cities, fake IDs. A route to the northern border mapped and memorized. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't trust anyone. But somehow, she knew. She always knew. It started with glances. Mencho staring at me too long during a meeting. A commander no longer including me in briefings. One night, one of the younger sicarios said to me, "You've been quiet lately." Dama notices things like that. That same week, a former colleague, someone I had trained with, was found hanging beneath an overpass in Querétaro. His chest was carved with a single phrase, "She decides." He had been planning to flee with his family. I knew because he'd asked me for help. I should have felt nothing. But I did. Guilt, panic, recognition. It could have been me. I doubled my efforts. Burned phones, rented a warehouse outside Colima to hide supplies, even paid a priest for forged papers. I was ready. Then one night after a routine delivery, I was pulled from the truck at a fake checkpoint. Not by soldiers, not by enemies, by my own. Faces I knew. Men I had laughed with, trained, trusted. No words were spoken. They drove me to an abandoned storage facility. Inside, the lights were dim, but I recognized the silhouette immediately. Dama. She sat at a steel table surrounded by folders. My folders. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse me. She simply said, "You've been busy, El Silencio." Then she began listing, calmly, methodically, everything. The bribes I had paid, the aliases I had registered, the exact amount I had hidden, the priest's name, the route I had chosen. I felt myself unravel. Then she placed a pistol on the table and spoke with the finality of a judge. "You have two choices. Serve me with no more illusions, or walk away after completing one last task." Behind me were 5 men tied to chairs, federal agents, informants. She wanted me to interrogate them, extract everything, then disappear. That night was not the bloodiest of my life, but it was the longest. When it ended, I wasn't the same man. I had crossed a line I didn't know existed. Not just obedience, not just violence, something deeper, something irreversible. She handed me a suitcase full of cash and said, "Go, but remember you never truly leave." And she was right. Even after I crossed the border, even after I changed my name, even after I vanished, I could still feel her eyes, watching, waiting. Because once you're marked by Dama, you never walk free. You only walk faster, until she decides to catch up. They say time heals. That distance dilutes guilt. That if you change your name, your city, your habits, maybe the past becomes just a bad dream. But I'm here to tell you that's a lie. I fled Mexico under the cover of dawn, driving through back roads with a forged passport and a heart that refused to slow down. I crossed borders in silence, took a new identity, and started over in a place where no one knew what the initials CJNG meant. On paper, I was clean. In reality, I was carrying something that soap and time can't erase. I thought I had escaped. For a while, I even convinced myself that freedom was possible. I worked at a car wash under a different name. I smiled at people in supermarkets. I nodded politely to neighbors. But every night when the lights went out, I heard her voice. Not loud, never loud. Just there in the shadows of my memory, in the silence between breaths, in the sound of my own guilt echoing through the walls. Dama, the woman who ruled the most feared cartel in Mexico without ever needing to fire a shot. I had served her killed, for her obeyed her whispers like they were scripture. And even when she let me go, she never let me forget. That was her true power. Not just control over lives, but over consciences, over memory, over the soul. The last time I saw her, she said, "You're free, but you carry a debt now, a debt no one can forgive." And she was right. I walk through life like a man wearing wet clothes under a suit, smiling outside, soaked inside. I flinch when I hear radios crackle. I tense up when someone calls me by my old name, even if it's a mistake. I don't sleep through the night. I don't dream without blood. I speak today not because I want redemption. There is none. I speak because the truth matters, because people still believe Nemesio was the top, that he was the mind behind CJNG. He wasn't. He was the blade. She was the hand. She still is. Somewhere in a quiet room with files and phones, she's still moving pieces, deciding who lives, who dies, who vanishes without a trace. And maybe, just maybe, by telling you this, I've drawn her eyes back to me. If I disappear after this, don't believe the headlines. Don't think I overdosed or fled again. Just know she found me. Because no one escapes her. Not really. She's not a person. She's a system. A ghost wrapped in silk and intelligence. And long after men like me are forgotten, long after Mencho's name fades from the news, she'll still be there watching, deciding, whispering. That's the truth I leave behind. Not to be forgiven, but to be remembered. She let me go, yes, but she never let me go free.